you guys have been asking for me to see if we can get some other content creators out here, other Steeler fans on the show to collaborate and talk a little bit on the channel. Well, we were able to do that, and it's a good one. Look, this guy, he works for Steelers Now. I don't know if anybody's caught him there, but mainly you know him on Steelers DB, either on Twitter or on YouTube. Derrick Bell is outstanding in what he does, breaking down film, talking football. We had a great time just chit-chatting about what we think this Arthur Smith's offense. So let's get him in here and let's talk about this Arthur Smith offense with Derrick Bell. All right, everybody. So up next, look, we got our man Steelers DB. You guys know him on YouTube. You know him that as on Twitter. Derrick Bell with Steelers Now. Derrick, how is it going today, man? How are you doing?
It's going great, man. I'm coming off vacation mode, so I'm just getting back in the swing of things. But it's game week, and I'm really excited to finally get some real football. I mean, preseason was fun. We had our fun with that. But now we got Steelers Falcons on Sunday. Football is the best time of the year, especially for me. I know it is for you guys as well. So I'm happy you guys are having me on to talk some ball.
Absolutely, man. We appreciate you giving us the time today. I told the fans we were going to do our best to try to get you on, man. So, again, we appreciate you giving us that time. So Let's just get into this. You know, Arthur Smith coming in, offensive coordinator. Look, I'll be honest. I was skeptical as hell initially, him coming on, just for the simple fact of, you know, everybody talked to me about, well, he was a good offensive coordinator in Tennessee and, you know, but what he did at Atlanta. I said, hold on, man. I go, he was still the offensive coordinator with the Falcons. I go, we can't I know he had head coaching responsibilities, but he called the plays. That was his offense. We can't overlook that. So first off, let me get your thoughts on him being the Steelers offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as soon as the season concluded, you know, one of my main things that I wrote about was like they needed to get serious about upgrading the quarterback spot and the offensive coordinator spot. And even though like Smith wasn't necessarily the top name that I was kind of like interested in, I do think that they at least hired someone that had an NFL caliber resume. And that's something that you really couldn't say about their previous hires. If you look at like even, you know, just years past, like Matt Canada didn't really have an NFL caliber resume. And even some of his predecessors, I think you could argue that they haven't had as much success as Smith had, you know, most of that being from his days in Tennessee. But, you know, I think it was a decent bet. I think it's going to give them some sort of competency. As you mentioned, like things didn't work out in Atlanta for several different reasons. You know, you can, I mean, as someone that's watched every snap of that, some of games like multiple times over, I think you can point to a myriad of different things, some of which was in his control and some of which that wasn't. But having said that, like, I think, you know, if you're a guy, I think in any stage in life and like you go on to your second act and you get this big promotion and you fail, because that's what he did. He failed in Atlanta. Yeah. It didn't work out for a myriad of different reasons. You know, I think it's going to motivate you to be better in your next stop. And I'm excited to see, like, I mean, I think the core system and his beliefs and what he likes to do on offense has really mostly stayed the same. But I'm interested to see like what kind of wrinkles he can add into this new act, because I think he's going to try to, you know, reassert himself as like one of the better offensive minds in the league. And we'll see if he can do that.
Right. And that's what I think is just reestablishing. He even mentioned that in his interview when people were asking him at minicamp and OTAs, you know, what do you feel about coming? And he was like, look, he was super excited to work for Mike Tomlin. That was the first thing that caught my eye, is that he was that excited about the opportunity. My only question is, I shouldn't say my only question, but one of my questions is do you think that we have the personnel to be able to run an Arthur Smith offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a valid concern. You know, there's a lot of change on the offensive side of the ball, so I think there's a ton of questions on that. You know, I do think that the heavy investments in the offensive line could potentially pay big dividends. I think that they've got a lot of really good athletes on the offensive line. I think James Daniels, Isaac Seumalo, really good guard tandem. Of course, Seumalo's out for a couple of weeks at least, but even some of the guys they've drafted in recent years, Broderick, fantastic athlete, still a lot to work on technically. Torrey Fautanu working his way back from a little bit of an injury. I think he's a fantastic athlete. He's someone that I was extremely high on coming out of Washington. He was actually my 7th ranked overall prospect coming out of the draft. So I was super excited that they were able to land him all the way down, you know, towards the middle of the first round. And then even some of the other guys too. Like I think Zach Frazier, even though like he's not an overwhelming athlete in his own right from a physical standpoint, like he is really good in his own run game because he takes really good angles. He plays with exceptional leverage. He has that wrestling background. So I think a lot of what they do, it seems like it could potentially fit in the run game. And then they've got two talented running backs. So I think when you look at like the core belief of what this offense is going to look like, it's going to be really zone heavy. They're going to run a lot of outside zone, a lot of mid zone. It's going to be a lot of tight end usage, so they're going to be really heavy in personnel. I think Pat Freiermuth is a pretty solid receiver, and I think Darnell Washington is kind of like the ideal tight end too for this offense. Not just because of his physicality in the run blocking game, but he's also a qualified pass protector. And some of the max protection looks that Smith likes to do with play action and stuff to push the ball down the field kind of requires him to take on some more difficult assignments. And he showed that he could do that in the preseason. So I think the big questions like obviously are around the quarterback, the schematic fit between the quarterbacks of, being Russ and Justin have a lot of similarities. They both are pretty gifted deep ball throwers. So I think that's kind of the idea is you get the chunk plays off play action, you throw the ball down the field. But I think the big question mark you have is like, are they going to be able to avoid sacks? Is there going to be enough guardrails in the offense to keep away some of those negative plays? And are they going to push the ball in the middle of the field? Because if you look back at his success with Tannehill in Tennessee, like they did a lot of damage between the numbers. Like that's really not Russ or Justin's game. Mm-hmm. And then I think the final question, like a lot of people have been talking about, is just the receiver room outside of George Pickens. Are they going to have enough guys to win in one-on-one situations, particularly outside the numbers? I think that's a big question. I don't really have a way to like make fans like feel better about that as we sit here today, but we'll see what it looks like on Sunday.
Well, and that's the thing. I was going to get to the wide receiver question is like in an Arthur Smith offense, it hasn't been an offense that has two great wide receivers. I think you got to have two weapons, but it doesn't necessarily have to be two wide receivers. I think the Steelers have that. I wrote an article about that, earlier in the offseason talking about that specifically. A lot of Steeler fans are just overblown. They just can't get it out of their mind because I think they got it in their mind that we were getting Brandon Ayuk. And I've said for the very beginning, I'm like, the Steelers were the side piece in this. There was no way that he was coming here. They just used us to get what they wanted. It is what it is. Having said that, we're going to find out against the Falcons pretty quickly whether we need two wide receivers or not. I just don't think his offense is predicated on having a dynamic duo like in Philadelphia or in Miami, something like that. I don't think it's predicated, but I do believe that you got to have two weapons. And I think the Steelers do that. Freiermuth's got to stay healthy. Don't get me wrong. And they throw the ball to the running backs out of the backfield, not just swing passes, Derek. They're not just doing that in this offense.
Yeah, I think the big thing too is like, I think, an Ayuk addition or whatever, as awesome as that would have been, I think my most underwhelming kind of part of this whole thing with the receiver room is like, I just felt like that there was more competent options available. Like there was a lot of guys available for relatively cheap contracts that they could have went after, and they just decided not to for whatever reason that I think are like just better players, even if they're not necessarily even like wide receiver 2 types, but like better players than what I consider like Van Jefferson. And, Roman Wilson's a guy I know that they're high on. He had a pretty limited like route tree at Michigan, but he does do some things I think fit well within the offense. He's excellent on crossers. Obviously, he has the speed to stretch the field horizontally. He can also get vertical. He's a really tough player in between the numbers. And there's a lot to like with him. We'll see how quickly they can get him up to speed. But it just makes me wonder about like an offense or two passers in general that are so predicated on winning outside the numbers. And if you're going to be seeing a lot of cover 3, because that's what the Arthur Smith offense sees a lot of, mainly because of like the tight splits and some of the formations that he rolls out there. Are those guys going to be able to win the one-on-ones on the boundary? I have no doubt that George Pickens is ready to take another leap. I've said that I think he's actually the most important player on the Steelers offense this year, not the quarterbacks, which I think is definitely different than most NFL teams, but got to be able to win outside the boundary. And I think, there are ways that you can mitigate that. Like a lot of what Smith did, like even with a guy like Corey Davis was an excellent blocker. So like them even finding answers from a blocking standpoint at that other receiver position would be big. But I think like the big overall goal of this offense is going to be, they're going to try to be uber efficient on the run game. They're going to try to stay ahead of the chains. They're going to try to stay in positive game scripts, let the defense keep them in everything. And then they're going to try to find enough explosives with the passing game to kind of keep them like quote unquote balanced. But it's not going to be a high powered passing attack. It's hard to see a reality in which that happens.
Right. And let's just keep talking about that as far as the run game is concerned. My thoughts on that are Arthur Smith runs a different type of run game. He does a lot of inside, outside zone stuff. Look, let's just be honest. The Steelers were awful at running any type of outside. You could even say inside zone stuff the last 2 years. Anytime they were able to move the ball on the ground, it was a power run game, off tackle, bringing an extra guard, a tight end, somebody to extra blocking, but basically going straight ahead. I think the additions of the athletic linemen, getting Broderick Jones in the lineup, Troy Faetanu, that's going to help. Although Isaac Siamala, he'll be out for a little bit. He's super strong at the point of attack. James Daniels at the point of attack. Zach Frazier, again, you talked about he's not a great athlete, but for his position, I think he's pretty good, especially with that wrestling background. He knows how to use angles. So there's a lot of Steeler fans out there that are concerned with the Arthur Smith running game that we haven't been able to do that. But I think the personnel, and also, look, let's just be honest, the imagination, some of the formations, we could basically call every Pittsburgh Steelers run play based on who was in the personnel group and how they aligned the last 2 years. It was that predictable. I don't think we're going to get that with Arthur Smith.
Yeah, I think too, like that's the thing too. I think with Smith, like he has a very distinct way that he wants to play, but he will do some interesting stuff. I mean, he'll use, like we've already seen in the preseason, he'll come out in 13 personnel to get teams in base, and then he'll go empty. And like that, there is some things that you can do to scheme up matchups with those personnel groupings. I mean, I think what you said, like there is a lot of people that are still, I think, worried about like what Najee or Jalen or this offense could look like in a more zone heavy scheme. I think that kind of goes back to a couple things. Like one, it was what I was talking about earlier with like finding kind of the knobs to tinker as far as what type of changes can Smith implement into his offense. Like I would personally like to see him lean into a little bit more gap stuff. I would like to see more pullers, mainly because the Steelers have a good set of offensive linemen that are really capable in space. Frazier's a really good puller. Fautanu's a really good puller. We saw Broderick Jones, the type of impact that he could have on some of the tackle pull stuff last year. So, I mean, I would like to see like more run game diversity. I mean, I think last year, the Falcons were like 84% like zone rushing plays. I mean, that was by far the most in the NFL. And like, I don't think that it needs to be that distinct, and it shouldn't be. I'm hoping it's not. But we'll see. But I do think that like the Steelers have two talented running backs that will figure it out. Like there's different ways. The additions on the offensive line should help, but there are also different ways to get the backs, particularly Najee Harris, headed more downhill on their tracks. Like I think that we're going to see more pistol. I think they hid some of that stuff in the preseason, but like the pistol just makes a lot of sense for me in terms of like getting Justin, some packages, maybe in the red zone, third down, but also like Russ. Like I think that Russ can operate in that, and it's a good way to kind of get into a lot of the things that Smith wants to do, but still, get some of the benefits for being in shotgun. So I'm interested to see what it looks like, man. This is definitely the first time like in my like time like doing this that I've spent this much time like studying one particular scheme or system. So I'm interested to see what it looks like. I want to see the changes. I want to see what works, what doesn't. But it's definitely one of the things I'm most watching for.
Gotcha. Let me follow up on what you mentioned a couple of different times. We have two obviously good running backs, which I think everybody kind of knows that. Mm-hmm. What do you think the splits are going to be? Just if everybody's healthy, what do you think the running back splits are going to be? They asked Mike Tomlin that question today. Mike Tomlin gave a Mike Tomlin answer. But what do you think are actually going to be the splits this season?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of tough to say. I think that I don't know, as time has wore on, I think that I'm actually a little bit higher on Najee Harris in this offense than I think the majority of people are. And I also just think about the backs that Smith's had success with. Obviously, Derrick Henry, he's just a completely different beast. You can't really compare anyone to him, but he is a bigger back. And then like even look at a guy like Tyler Algier. Like 2 years ago, the Atlanta offense was kind of humming a little bit, despite some holes from a personnel standpoint. Like they probably had their best year that they had in 2022. Algier went over 1,000 rushing yards. You look at Cordero Patterson, I think a lot of people kind of assume that he's a speed back, but like because he's a former wide receiver, but he's a power back too. Like Smith likes the downhill brawler types. And I think that Najee, even though he hasn't necessarily played in a lot of outside zone stuff, I do think that he could fit into this system with some necessary tweaks. And like, I think Jalen too, like, I think the question with Jalen that I think everybody wants answered is like, what happens if his usage does get, I guess, increased? Like, is he able to continue to be as uber efficient as he's been? I think normally like logic and like data will tell you like the more usage someone gets, the less their efficiency, is indicated or whatever. But I think that the split it's probably going to be pretty similar to last year, like maybe like 60-40, 55-45. But I could also see like both of these guys having more rushing yards than they did last year, just because I think the volume is going to be there. Like Smith's a guy, like, this is not one of my favorite parts of like his offense, but like you can be down 2 scores in the second half and he's not going to abandon the run game. Like he's still going to be pounding the ball. So like these guys are, there's nothing necessarily preventing him from handing the ball off like 30 times a game. And like, you just don't see that a lot in the NFL, but like, regardless of situation, he wants to run the ball. And we'll see. A lot of this offense is going to be on the run game shoulders. And, but I think they have 2 talented backs that could potentially make this thing work.
Gotcha. So I got a question from a couple of my shows. We're talking about Jack Colletto. And so I thought I'd save this one for you. He didn't make the 53 man. And I'm like, man, look, I love me some 21, 22, 23 I even love Derrick, even 20 personnel. That's how far back I go with it, man. I love a fullback. Now I know he's on the practice squad and you have that potential to be brought up. But were you surprised he didn't make the team? I know the Steelers didn't use a fullback last year, but Arthur Smith usually keeps one on his offense. So were you surprised he didn't make the 53 man initially?
It's definitely a good shout, especially from your audience. It definitely shows that, they're paying attention too. Because I think the big thing with Smith's offense, like you look at like Keith Smith, a guy that played about 17% of their offensive snaps last year. It was a huge part of their offense. Like a lot of the things that they like to do in the zone run game, he likes to do a lot of lead stuff. They have some cool stuff that they can do in 2-back settings. My main question was the entire time I was hoping, like while I was at training camp in Latrobe with Steelers Now, or just like through the preseason, I was kind of like looking, okay, who's going to be the fullback? It seemed like it was really Colletto the entire time. I don't even know that I saw another player take reps at fullback. So for him not to be on the 53 man roster was a little bit surprising. So I don't know. I don't know that Connor Hayward is that type of player. Maybe they could potentially try him. Michael Pruitt is also on the roster. Pruitt actually started, he's been with Smith for a long time. He played with him in Tennessee. Smith brought him to Atlanta, and then they brought him here to Pittsburgh. But Pruitt actually started kind of as a quasi fullback or H-back. So before actually moving to more of an inline tight end role in recent years. So those are potential options that they could be looking into. It's funny. I actually just posted a video on my channel on their practice squad signing Ben Skoranek from the Texans. He got traded there. He was with the Rams the last 3 years. Skoranek's a really interesting player because like when I started combing through his film, like they did some pretty cool stuff with him in the backfield. Like he's a receiver by designation, but they would put him in the backfield. He's a very qualified blocker, plays with a lot of intensity. He's like 6'3", 225. So he has like the frame to be like an effective blocker. Maybe definitely not like an every down like fullback type, but I kind of wonder, like, given the fact that that dude also had like 12 special teams tackles last year, I kind of wonder if like he's a guy that they elevate and like maybe Smith tries to get kind of creative because him and McVay, like they've worked together in the past and like there is some carryover between the two schemes. So I think that they could get Skoranek up to date or whatever on the system, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. That's one of the questions I don't have an answer to, but I'm hoping we get an answer to soon because I don't want to see the 2-back stuff like completely done away with.
No, I would like to see it. Like I said, I'm a big fan of it. And again, I was excited about that part of it, bringing that to the offense, but we'll see what happens. I still don't think that the 53, I know we're sitting here, we're recording this on a Tuesday. It's going to come out on Wednesday. I get all of that. I still don't know that the Steelers are done trying to finalize this roster, man. I just don't. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Last question before I get you out of here, man. Look, the Arthur Smith's offense, the passing concepts are kind of layered. A lot of play action, but they're layered to one side. So it makes it easier per se for a quarterback, to go to 1, 2, 3 versus across the field 1, 2, 3. Is this an offense that Russell Wilson can actually thrive in? Because there's a lot of people out there that are saying no, even that it's layered. They're saying, yeah, that's just not what he thrives in. I've pushed back against that a little bit and think, well, hold on a second. Yeah, first of all, that's never been an issue with his accuracy. It's always been about holding on to the ball too long or getting out of it too quick and not seeing everything down the field. But his accuracy's never been the issue here. So do you think that this layered, I guess the layered passing tree or just route concepts, can he thrive in this?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a complicated question because Russ has a very distinct way that he wants to play. Like, you're not going to change Russ. Like they try. I mean, Russ has played with so many different coordinators, and like he's always played Russ ball, and like he's had a tremendous amount of success over his career. Over the course of his career, he's made like 9 Pro Bowls or something like that. He's had a very successful career. It's just I think that some of the downtick in his production over the last 2-3 years has been kind of a combination of like some injuries, kind of affecting some of his effectiveness in some different ways. Maybe a little bit in an accuracy standpoint, but that's still not necessarily like a hole in his game. And I think like the big thing has just been like the mobility. Like he hasn't been able to extend plays, and he's not quite as dynamic with the ball in his hands because he is a scrambler by nature. And some of those like the concepts that you're referring to, like I kind of call them like guardrails within the offense. I think that's a lot of what the play action passing game is designed to do, because that's stuff that like Russ can do. It's not a lot of like progressions. It's kind of like, okay, I'm alerting this if I get this like 1 safety or 2 safety look. If not, I'm going to read this 1 to 2 to check down. And like that, it provides good necessary guardrails for your quarterbacks without having to do a bunch of full field reads. Cause like the thing with Russ is like, because of his height, like a lot of people don't really like, I think the way that we discuss quarterback height is kind of funny, but what matters is like a lot of the backside digs that are even like in this offense. I just don't think that Russ is going to be able to hit them because he's not tall enough. And that's just because like as the play progresses, you get 2.5 seconds in, the pocket starts to collapse a little bit. It's difficult for a guy who's less than 6 foot tall to find those throwing windows to kind of access the middle of the field. That's why some of those concepts are not necessarily going to work, but Russ can still play outside the numbers. Like he's still going to be able to do like the sail concept stuff, the flood concepts. You're still going to be able to use like a lot of your quick hitters. I actually do think he was a little bit better in quick game last year than maybe I had seen him previously. So maybe that's something that they can lean into a little bit more. But I think the idea is like, I don't think the Steelers are naive enough to think that they're going to be getting like 2019 version of Russ. I think the idea is that they can like min max him to the point where it's like, okay, we need you to provide explosive plays off play action. We need you to win outside the numbers. We need you to give us like a couple 3rd down conversions to the per game. We need you to scramble for a 1st down or 2. And they want this to be a really low volume passing attack. And I think that that's, how good can an offense like that be? I'm kind of skeptical a little bit, but about the ceiling of it, but like, could it provide enough competency to keep this team in a fight for a playoff spot and to keep them at least on schedule a little bit to where they can give the defense a break? I think that is definitely within the realm of possibility. So we'll see. I think the main thing that I still question is like, how healthy is Russ right now? Like, is he 100%? Like, we didn't really see him move around at all. He missed a lot of time with the calf. I really am curious about that, but we'll find that out for sure on Sunday as for terms of like how he's moving.
Yeah. That was another thing for me is I'm just not sure he's 100%. But it also let me know that the Steelers had absolutely no intention of giving Justin Fields his job because Russ wasn't 100%. And you had Russ or Justin Fields out there in preseason game number 2 running around with the 3s and 4s offensive line at the end of the game. People get, well, he's just trying to put him out. I'm like, no, that's not what you do with a guy that's trying to battle for a starting job. So, Derrick, man, I want to thank you a lot, man, for giving us the time. I know I went over it at the beginning, man, but tell everybody where they can find all your good stuff, man.
Yeah, it's at Steelers_DB on Twitter and on YouTube. And then all of our written work can be found at SteelersNow.com.
Perfect, man. Thank you again for giving us your time. We will bring you back as many times as you can find the time. We will bring you back, man. We appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you guys for having me on. It was a good time for sure.
All right. Thank you. Man, we want to thank Derrick Bell, a.k.a. Steelers DB. You can find him, like I said, on Twitter at Steelers_DB. You can find him right here on YouTube. Make sure you guys go check out all his stuff, man, because he does an outstanding job of, number one, understanding football. The man knows football, breaks it down to a level where the novice football guy can understand. But the stuff that he does with the all 22, I can't wait to get on there and talk some of that with him because, like I said, he knows football, knows exactly what he's talking about, breaks it down in a sophisticated way, but also in a way that a football novice can understand, man. So make sure you guys show that guy some love. Go check out his page. And again, we will bring him back as many times as we can possibly get him on the show.